There is a reason your eyes stopped here. Not by accident. Not by chance. Not because you simply happened to cross paths with these words at the exact moment they appeared before you. Something deeper is moving beneath the surface. Before you continue, allow yourself one quiet breath. Not because I need your attention. Because your spirit has been carrying a question that your mind has not fully spoken aloud. A question hidden beneath your busy days. A question hidden beneath the conversations you never finished. A question hidden beneath the memories you pretend no longer matter. And tonight, heaven is drawing near to that question. Listen carefully. For what you are about to hear is not merely about the person who left. It is not merely about the distance that formed. It is not merely about the silence that followed. It is about something that happened after the silence. Something neither of you expected. Something that changed everything. My child. There was a moment when they made a promise to themselves. A private promise. A painful promise. A promise nobody else heard. Nobody else witnessed. Nobody else knew existed. They sat alone with their thoughts. Perhaps late at night. Perhaps during a quiet drive. Perhaps while staring at a ceiling that seemed to hold more questions than answers. And in that moment they told themselves something firm. Something final. Something they believed would protect them. They said they would never think about you again. Never. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not months from now. Not ever. They convinced themselves it was over. Finished. Closed. Buried. Gone. And for a brief moment, they believed it. They truly believed it. Because sometimes the heart becomes exhausted. Sometimes emotions become too heavy. Sometimes memories become too loud. And people convince themselves that forgetting is easier than feeling. So they built walls. Higher than before. Stronger than before. Colder than before. They tried to create distance between themselves and everything that reminded them of you. Your voice. Your energy. Your smile. Your presence. Even the smallest things became dangerous reminders. Songs. Places. Certain words. Unexpected scents carried by the wind. Tiny details that nobody else would notice. Details capable of reopening doors they desperately wanted closed. And so they fought. Not against you. Against themselves. Against memories. Against emotions. Against the truth buried underneath everything. Because there is something few people understand. The mind can declare a chapter finished. But the soul does not always agree. The mind can say goodbye. The soul can continue whispering a name. The mind can lock a door. The soul can keep a light burning behind it. And that is where the story truly begins. Because after they promised themselves they would never think of you again. Something happened. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Not in a way the world would recognize. It began quietly. Almost invisibly. Like the first drop of rain before a storm. Like the first crack in a wall that seemed indestructible. Like a whisper carried through a room nobody knew was occupied. One day they were moving through life as usual. Following routines. Following obligations. Following distractions. Trying to convince themselves everything was normal. Trying to convince themselves they had moved on. Trying to convince themselves you no longer mattered. Then suddenly, without warning, a memory appeared. Not invited. Not requested. Not searched for. It simply arrived. A moment. A laugh. A conversation. A look. A feeling. One tiny memory. And it lingered longer than it should have. Long enough to disturb their certainty. Long enough to create discomfort. Long enough to make them wonder why it had returned. They pushed it away. Of course they did. They reminded themselves of their promise. The promise to stop thinking about you. The promise to stop feeling. The promise to stop remembering. But memories do not always leave when commanded. especially when heaven is involved, especially when unfinished emotions remain alive beneath the surface, especially when something greater than coincidence begins to unfold. Days passed. Then another reminder appeared, different this time, unexpected, strange, a familiar phrase, a familiar expression, something someone said, something someone wore, something that resembled a fragment of you. Again they felt it, again they resisted, again they told themselves it meant nothing, but resistance requires energy. And eventually even the strongest walls begin to weaken. My child, you must understand something important. When people truly stop caring, they rarely spend energy trying to convince themselves they do not care. Read that again within your spirit. When something is truly gone, it requires no constant effort to suppress. It simply fades. But this did not fade, no matter how hard they tried. No matter how determined they became, no matter how many distractions they chased, no matter how many explanations they created, something remained, something alive, something unfinished, and heaven saw it. Heaven saw every silent battle, every hidden thought, every moment they caught themselves remembering, every second they quickly changed the subject inside their own mind. Every time your name almost surfaced, every time your image appeared unexpectedly, every time their heart reacted before logic could intervene. You see only the silence, but heaven sees everything. You see what was said, heaven sees what was felt. You see the distance, heaven sees the invisible thread stretching beneath it. And those threads have not disappeared, not yet, not completely. Not the way they believed. Then came the night that changed something. A night they never expected. A night nobody else knew about. A night that looked ordinary from the outside. Yet inside, everything shifted. They could not sleep. Perhaps they blamed stress. Perhaps they blamed exhaustion. Perhaps they blamed coincidence. But their spirit knew something different was happening. Because the harder they tried to rest, the more thoughts appeared, thoughts they had worked so hard to silence, questions they had worked so hard to avoid, memories they had worked so hard to bury. And among those thoughts, you appeared again, not as a distant memory, not as an old chapter, not as someone forgotten. You appeared with startling clarity, almost as if time had folded back upon itself. Almost as if the distance never happened, almost as if some invisible hand had reached into their heart and illuminated a room they thought had gone dark. That frightened them, not because of you, because of what it meant, because if you could still appear with such force, then perhaps they were not as free as they claimed, perhaps they were not as finished as they pretended, perhaps they were not as healed as they believed. And that realization shook something deep inside. But my child, the story becomes even more mysterious, because what happened next was beyond logic, beyond planning, beyond control, beyond explanation. Over the following days, the reminders multiplied, not dramatically, subtly, enough to be noticed, enough to create questions, enough to disrupt certainty. Your favorite song appeared unexpectedly. A place connected to a memory resurfaced. A conversation echoed something you once said. A stranger carried an energy that reminded them of you. Again, and again, and again. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Yet they still tried, still resisted, still argued with themselves, still insisted it meant nothing. Because accepting the truth would require facing emotions they had spent so long avoiding. But there is something powerful about truth. The longer it is ignored, the louder it becomes. And soon the whispers became impossible to overlook. They began wondering things they promised themselves they would never wonder again. How are you? Are you happy? Do you ever think about them? Did you truly move on? Did you forget? Did you mean what you said? Do you still carry the memories? Questions, 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 questions multiplying inside the silence, questions creating cracks in the walls, questions reopening doors they swore would remain closed forever. And while this unfolded, something else was happening, something even deeper, something they themselves could not fully understand. Their heart was beginning to remember what their mind was trying to erase. Not specific events, not specific conversations, something bigger, the feeling, the connection, the energy, the part of your presence that cannot be explained with ordinary words, the part people carry long after details disappear, the part that remains long after logic runs out of explanations. And that is when heaven leaned closer, because there are moments in life when souls arrive at crossroads. Moments when denial reaches its limit. Moments when hidden truths begin demanding attention. Moments when people realize they are no longer running from someone else. They are running from themselves. And that realization was approaching faster than they understood. Every day brought them closer. Every reminder. Every memory. Every coincidence. Every quiet moment. Every unanswered question. Every unexpected feeling, closer, 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 until eventually they could no longer pretend nothing was happening. Something was happening, something undeniable, something real, something powerful enough to survive silence, powerful enough to survive distance, powerful enough to survive time. Yet they still did not know the full reason. They still did not know why heaven kept allowing these moments. They still did not know why your presence continued appearing in places where it should not exist. They still did not know why their spirit seemed determined to revisit a chapter their mind had already closed. But answers were coming, slowly, quietly, inevitably. And then, a single event occurred. One moment, one unexpected moment. A moment so small most people would overlook it, yet it carried the power to change everything. The power to turn curiosity into realization. The power to transform memories into truth. The power to reveal what had been hidden beneath the surface all along. And when that moment arrived, the promise they made to themselves began collapsing in ways they never imagined. Because what they discovered next was not merely about remembering you, it was about understanding why they could never truly forget, and the revelation waiting for them. The revelation heaven had been preparing all this time was closer than either of you realize, very close, closer than yesterday, closer than last week, closer than the moment these words first found you, and when it finally unfolds. Nothing will look the same again, but that moment has not fully arrived yet, not quite, because before heaven reveals what happened next, there is one hidden piece of the story you still do not know, one secret movement occurring behind the scenes, one truth that changes the meaning of every sign, every memory, and every unexpected thought they have been experiencing. My beloved child, stay with me a little longer. Do not rush ahead. Do not assume you already know where this story is going, because the truth that is about to unfold is not the truth most people expect. Many imagine that when someone cannot stop thinking about another person, it is simply nostalgia, a memory, a passing emotion, a temporary weakness. But what I am revealing now reaches deeper than memory, deeper than nostalgia, deeper than simple longing. For while they believed they were fighting thoughts of you, something else was happening beneath the surface, something they could not see, something they could not control, something heaven had allowed to awaken. You see, my child, there comes a moment in certain journeys when life removes the noise. The distractions begin losing their power. The constant motion slows. The endless running becomes exhausting. and suddenly a person finds themselves face to face with their own heart. Not the version they show others. Not the version they post for the world. Not the version they use to appear strong. The real heart. The unguarded heart. The heart that still remembers things the mind wishes it could erase. That moment arrived for them, quietly, without warning. One ordinary day became different from every day before it. Not because something dramatic happened around them. Because something dramatic happened within them. At first they could not explain it. They woke carrying a strange feeling. Not sadness. Not happiness. Not regret. Something deeper. A sensation that something unfinished was trying to reach the surface. The feeling followed them through the day. Through conversations. Through work. Through routines. Through moments that should have felt normal. Yet nothing felt entirely normal anymore. Because every path their thoughts traveled somehow led back to the same place. Back to you. And the more they resisted it, the stronger it became. That frustrated them. It confused them. It even frightened them at times. Because they remembered the promise. The promise they made in the darkness. The promise that they would never think about you again. Yet here they were. Thinking, wondering, remembering, feeling, and every attempt to suppress it only seemed to make it return with greater force. Then came the questions. Not questions about the past. Questions about the present. Those were the dangerous ones. Because memories can be dismissed. Present feelings are harder to ignore. They began asking themselves things they swore they would never ask. What if I misunderstood everything? What if I walked away too quickly? What if there was more to the story than I allowed myself to see? What if the connection was real? What if the feelings never actually disappeared? What if I only buried them? And that final question echoed louder than all the others. What if I only buried them? My child. Many people believe buried emotions disappear. But emotions do not vanish simply because they are hidden. Seeds are buried too. Yet seeds grow. And some feelings become strongest in the dark. The emotions they thought were gone had not vanished. They had been waiting. Waiting beneath years. Waiting beneath distractions. Waiting beneath pride. Waiting beneath fear. Waiting beneath silence. Waiting for the moment heaven allowed truth to rise again. And truth was rising. Slowly. Steadily. Relentlessly. The signs around them were no longer random. The memories were no longer accidental. The dreams were no longer meaningless. Yes, the dreams. For there was a night they have told almost no one about. A night they woke with your presence so vivid it felt real. Not a vague image. Not a passing fragment. Something stronger. A dream that carried emotion. A dream that lingered after waking. A dream that refused to fade. The kind of dream people remember all day. The kind of dream that follows them into the evening. The kind of dream that makes them stare into space wondering why it felt so real. When they opened their eyes that morning, they tried to dismiss it. They blamed imagination, stress, memory. Anything except the possibility that something deeper was occurring. Yet the feeling remained. Your energy remained. Your presence remained. And throughout the day they caught themselves replaying moments from the dream. Again. And again. And again. That was the moment something began changing. Not all at once. But undeniably. Because for the first time, they stopped fighting the thoughts. Only for a moment. Only briefly, but it happened. They allowed themselves to wonder, allowed themselves to remember, allowed themselves to feel, and once that door opened even slightly, the truth began pouring through. My child. There are doors people spend years holding shut, doors locked with fear, locked with disappointment, locked with pride, locked with unanswered questions. But when heaven decides a lesson is ready to be learned. Even the strongest locks begin to fail. And theirs was failing. Every day brought greater clarity. Every day stripped away another layer of denial. Every day exposed another hidden emotion. Until eventually they reached a realization they never expected. The pain was not coming from thinking about you. The pain was coming from pretending they didn't. That realization changed everything. Because suddenly the battle looked different. Suddenly they understood why they felt exhausted. Why they felt restless. Why they felt unsettled. They were no longer fighting memories. They were fighting truth. And truth always demands energy to suppress. The heart knows this. The soul knows this. Heaven knows this. Eventually the weight became impossible to ignore. So they stopped asking why you appeared in their thoughts. And started asking why you never truly left. That question opened a door they were not prepared for. Because once they asked it honestly, the answers started appearing. Not all at once. Little pieces, little revelations, little flashes of understanding. They remembered moments they once overlooked, conversations they dismissed, feelings they minimized, signs they ignored, and suddenly those pieces began fitting together, like fragments of a puzzle finally forming a picture they had spent years avoiding, a picture that revealed something they never wanted to admit. You mattered more than they ever allowed themselves to say, more than they admitted to others, more than they admitted to themselves, more than they admitted when they walked away. And that realization shook them, not because it was new, because it was true. Truth has power when finally acknowledged. The soul recognizes it immediately. The heart responds to it immediately. And once recognized, it cannot easily be forgotten again. Yet this is not where the story reaches its turning point. No, the turning point came afterward. The moment heaven had been quietly arranging. The moment that changed the direction of everything. It happened unexpectedly, as the most important moments often do. A single encounter, a single message, a single glimpse, a single piece of information. I will not yet reveal exactly what it was, only that it arrived when they least expected it, and when it appeared, time seemed to pause. The world continued moving around them, but inside, everything stopped. Their thoughts stopped, their excuses stopped, their certainty stopped, because what they saw forced them to confront a possibility they had spent so long avoiding. The possibility that this story was not over. The possibility that their promise had failed. The possibility that the feelings they buried were still alive. The possibility that your chapter never truly ended. My child. When that realization struck, they did not immediately act. That is important. People imagine revelations create instant action. Often they create silence first. Deep silence. The kind that forces reflection. The kind that keeps someone awake at night. The kind that makes them stare out windows. The kind that makes them replay years within a matter of hours. That is where they are now. Standing between what was and what could be. Standing between certainty and possibility. Standing between the story they told themselves and the truth slowly revealing itself. And while they stand there, heaven continues moving, quietly, patiently, purposefully, because there is still one thing they have not fully discovered, one final realization approaching them, one truth capable of changing everything they thought they understood about you, everything they thought they understood about the connection, everything they thought they understood about themselves. The signs have led them this far, the memories have led them this far. The dreams have led them this far, but what comes next? What comes next is different, because the next revelation does not come through memory, it does not come through dreams, it does not come through coincidence, it comes through something real, something tangible, something impossible to ignore, and when it arrives, The promise they once made to never think about you again will completely collapse, because they are about to learn something. Something heaven has hidden until the perfect moment. Something that will force them to make a decision. A decision they can no longer postpone. A decision they can no longer avoid. A decision that has been approaching for far longer than either of you realize. And when that decision finally stands before them, the choice they make could alter the entire direction of this story. But that moment, that exact moment, has only just begun to unfold. My beloved child, do not leave yet. The story is entering the place where everything begins to change. Not on the surface, not in the way people expect, but deep beneath appearances, where destinies quietly shift before anyone notices. There are moments in life when a person believes they have complete control over their emotions. They believe they have mastered them, buried them, silenced them, locked them away so thoroughly that they can never return. Yet what they call control is often only distance, and distance can create an illusion that something is gone when it is merely out of sight. That illusion had protected them for a long time, long enough for them to believe it was real, long enough for them to build a new version of themselves around it, long enough to convince everyone around them, and even themselves, that your chapter belonged entirely to the past. But heaven had been watching the moments nobody else saw, watching the brief hesitation whenever your memory surfaced, watching the strange silence that appeared when someone mentioned something connected to you, watching the way their eyes sometimes drifted away when certain thoughts appeared, watching the tiny reactions they immediately tried to hide. Because while the world only sees actions, heaven sees what happens before actions. Heaven sees the hidden movements of the heart. And there was one movement becoming stronger, stronger every day. A quiet pull, a growing curiosity, a question they could no longer escape. What if forgetting you was never the answer? That question arrived softly at first, almost like a whisper, easy to ignore, easy to dismiss. But whispers become louder when they carry truth. And soon that question was no longer appearing once in a while. It was appearing everywhere, in quiet moments, in crowded rooms, during ordinary routines, in the middle of conversations, in the silence before sleep, in the first moments after waking, again, and again, and again. What if forgetting you was never the answer? The more they tried to dismiss it, the stronger it became. Because truth does not weaken when ignored. Truth grows heavier. Eventually it demands attention. And that demand was approaching. My child. There is something few people understand. The heart does not measure importance the way the mind does. The mind remembers facts. The heart remembers impact. The mind remembers events. The heart remembers transformation. The mind remembers what happened. The heart remembers how it changed. And that was the realization beginning to emerge. They were no longer remembering specific moments with you. They were remembering who they became when you were part of their life. That is a different kind of memory. A more powerful kind. A more dangerous kind. Because once someone begins remembering transformation, they start questioning everything that came afterward. And they began questioning, quietly, privately, relentlessly. They wondered why certain experiences after you never felt quite the same. They wondered why certain connections seemed incomplete. They wondered why some conversations felt empty despite appearing perfect. They wondered why they kept comparing things without realizing they were comparing them. And slowly, a realization formed. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to disturb their peace. Enough to make them stop in the middle of ordinary moments. Enough to make them stare into silence. Enough to make them wonder whether they had misunderstood something very important. Yet even then, they continued resisting. Because accepting the truth would require courage. More courage than people realize. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. It takes courage to revisit emotions you abandoned. It takes courage to question decisions that shaped years of your life. And that courage had not fully arrived yet. But heaven was preparing it, piece by piece, moment by moment, step by step. Then came the encounter. Not the one I hinted at before. Another one, smaller, yet somehow more powerful. They met someone unexpectedly. Perhaps a stranger. Perhaps an acquaintance. Perhaps someone they barely noticed at first. The details are not important. What matters is what happened during the conversation. A simple sentence was spoken. An ordinary sentence. The kind people hear every day. Yet when those words reached them, something inside froze. Because the sentence carried a truth they had been avoiding. A truth disguised as casual conversation. A truth that arrived from unexpected lips. And when they heard it, they immediately thought of you. Not intentionally, not consciously, instantly. As if their soul recognized something before their mind could react. That moment lingered. Long after the conversation ended. Long after the day continued. Long after they tried to move on. The sentence remained. And attached to it was you, my child. Have you ever noticed how heaven often speaks through unexpected messengers? Not because those people know they are being used. Because truth has a way of finding paths where resistance is weakest. And this truth found its path. The walls weakened further. The certainty weakened further. The distance weakened further. Until eventually they found themselves doing something they promised they would never do. They stopped running. Not completely. Not forever. But for one significant moment. They stopped. And in that moment, they allowed themselves to feel everything. The sadness. The questions. The memories. The possibilities. The regrets. The hope. Everything. No distractions. No excuses. No denial. Just truth. Raw and undeniable. It overwhelmed them. Because emotions buried for a long time do not return gently. They return with the weight of every day they were ignored. Every month they were suppressed. Every year they remained hidden. And suddenly they understood why your memory had become impossible to escape. It wasn't because heaven was punishing them. It wasn't because they were trapped in the past. It wasn't because they were weak. It was because there was something they still needed to understand. Something unfinished. Something unresolved. Something waiting. That realization marked the beginning of a profound shift. A shift invisible to everyone else, but powerful enough to change everything. Because once someone accepts that a feeling exists, they can no longer honestly pretend it doesn't. And now they knew. They knew the feelings remained. They knew the questions remained. They knew the connection remained. What they did not know was what to do next. That uncertainty became its own struggle, a new battlefield, a new source of sleepless nights, because knowing the truth and acting upon it are not the same thing. One requires awareness, the other requires courage, and courage was still growing, slowly, quietly, like dawn before sunrise. Then something happened that neither they nor you could have predicted. A detail emerged, a piece of information, a revelation, small enough to be overlooked by most people, yet powerful enough to alter everything. When they discovered it, their entire perspective shifted. Memories they once interpreted one way suddenly appeared different. Conversations gained new meaning. Silences gained new meaning. Choices gained new meaning. Even the ending gained new meaning. It was as though they had spent years staring at one side of a painting, only to suddenly realize there was another side. And the second side told a completely different story. That discovery left them shaken. Because if this new understanding was true, Then many things they believed about you were never true at all. Many assumptions collapsed instantly. Many conclusions lost their foundation. And with every collapsing assumption, a new possibility emerged. A possibility they had never seriously considered before. A possibility so powerful that it terrified them. Not because it was impossible, because it might actually be possible. My child. This is where the story reaches a crossroads. Not a crossroads of destiny, a crossroads of choice. Because heaven can reveal truth, but heaven does not force decisions. Truth was being revealed. The path was becoming visible. The signs were becoming clearer. Yet the next step belonged to them. And they knew it. For the first time in a very long time, they could no longer blame circumstances. They could no longer blame timing. They could no longer hide behind old stories. The decision was approaching, closer than ever before. And as that decision approached, another realization arrived. Perhaps the most important realization yet. A realization that struck their heart with unexpected force. They suddenly understood that the question was never whether they could stop thinking about you. That battle had already been lost. The real question was why they never truly wanted to. And when that realization finally settled into their soul, everything changed. Because the answer waiting behind that question was bigger than memory, bigger than longing, bigger than nostalgia. It revealed the true reason heaven kept allowing your name to return. The true reason the signs never stopped. The true reason the dreams refused to fade.